And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We've got a special training camp edition of the podcast today. Shayne and I weren't able to make it on last week due to schedule conflicts, but we are back here talking Steelers training camp, and there's been a lot that's happened, Shayne, since we last talked. We're obviously going to touch on the Roman Wilson news, what that means for the Steelers, what it means for him moving forward. And some of the other big things to happen this week. And I want to start with this, Shayne, something that wasn't on the agenda today, but a fight just broke out at Steelers camp. We've got our first official fight. It comes the second day into padded practices. It's not unusual to see a scuffle on the field right there. I saw that Joey Porter was in on it. Somebody hit Justin Fields late. I didn't have time to kind of to zoom in and track the whole video as it was happening. But we do have some action down on the field there.
Yeah, this is the type of stuff that starts happening once you can actually hit each other, because obviously before padded practices, there's hitting and there's some stuff, but it's not legitimately close to, it's never close to NFL speed really in training camp, but it's not even close before padded practices start. So this is when you'll see some of this stuff. A lot of new faces too, could be one of those situations. I want to say I heard it was Mason McCormick that kind of jumped in when Fields got hit. He started that kind of thing, which you like to see that from a rookie and an offensive lineman. It makes sense that wants to protect the quarterback. But again, nothing to worry about really, but it is funny every time that happens. How soon does it happen in this case? Day two.
Yeah. And the hit on Fields was not anything flagrant.
No, it wasn't
at all.
crazy.
He probably didn't need to fall over, but
Landon Roberts I just saw was who hit him apparently.
Okay. Roberts, yeah, he's the one that got nudged and then went back in, and then Joey Porter was in there, and so it's always exciting to see, if nothing else, as long as nobody's getting hurt with that. And of course, the Steelers started training camp with the NFL mandated 4-day ramp up period. They don't let you just jump into padded practices. No. You have to take a little bit of time to get up to speed, if you will, and nothing came from that really. Unfortunately, we had that first notable injury happen, at least during training camp. We had injuries coming into camp. Obviously, Cole Holcomb, we're going to talk about him in a second here. Cordarrelle Patterson is on the NFI list, the non-football injury list, with a hamstring injury. And so we'll see when we get him back. But let's talk about Roman Wilson, Shayne. This is one of the biggest topics surrounding Steelers training camp right now, because it does have big implications. I would say in most cases, when a third-round pick goes down with an injury, you can overcome that. Not a big deal. In this case, Shayne, there's a chance we're talking about Steelers' number 2 wide receiver here. This is completely undecided, but this really hurts Wilson in that running, because not only is he going up against a veteran like Van Jefferson for that role, Calvin Austin's in the mix there as well, it appears to be, and we'll get to all these and we'll talk about where everybody lies in the pecking order right now based on where they've been playing at training camp. But Roman Wilson, Shayne, I think outside of Pickens is the most talented of the group. And I think that he has the most upside of the group outside of Pickens. And so I would like to see him be able to claim that spot at some point. But this injury is a setback. Now, the good thing is it's nothing super threatening. It ends up being an ankle sprain. I don't know. They didn't detail whether it's a high ankle sprain or just a general old ankle sprain. He's listed week to week with this injury. But this will force him out of action, and according to Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, for a minimum of 2 weeks. And so if we're just looking at the calendar here, Shayne, that has him missing the opening preseason game against the Houston Texans, probably missing the next one as well against the Buffalo Bills, because you would only have 3 days to prep in between. And so I think he's probably going to end up missing 2 preseason games here. What do you make of this injury? Is it something that's just not a big deal at all, or how does this impact Roman Wilson and the Steelers?
I do think it's a big deal just because he's a rookie, right? You don't want a rookie player who you probably at some point, whether you want to or not, are going to rely on him to be a part of the passing game. That's just part of ramping up as a rookie, is being able to find your role and figure out the offense and do all that stuff. And it's much harder to do that when you can't actually go out in the field and rep this stuff, right? So I think it's a bigger deal for that reason. I don't think it's necessarily going to drastically change what his role ends up being at some point. It could delay that, though. It could put Van Jefferson out there a lot more than maybe we want to. It might force Calvin Austin to play more than maybe he's ready to at this point too. May even force a move at receiver, depending on if it extends into the season or close to it, and they don't think the group they have is good enough going into the season, right? That's still the topic a lot of people want to talk about. I do think, though, like you said, he is the best option in terms of, like, if you're looking for the upside of this passing game this year, he should be the second receiver targeted on a lot of plays if we want to maximize the upside of the team. I think with him out, it becomes Van Jefferson clearly is number 2 outside receiver right now, with Austin probably being the top slot guy, where I'd kind of actually rather have Wilson be the slot and Austin be the number 2 outside receiver. I know he's very short, but his best tape in college came on the outside as an undersized receiver, as kind of like that Z receiver that, yeah, he's not going to be press a lot probably, but he is quick enough to get off the line and do some of that stuff. I think that's the best grouping that we have. We won't see it unless Wilson's out there. That's kind of the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, and we'll expand on that more when we get to that wide receiver position, when we go through each positional group today, Shayne. And there's there's something you don't want to see in training camp ever is injuries. And then within that, there's subcategories like you don't want to see your quarterback get injured.
Nope.
You don't want to see your star get injured. And then after that, you don't want to see rookies get injured because these setbacks are huge. We've seen how they've impacted players in the past. Last year, Corey Trice Jr.'s season was lost due to an ACL tear early in training camp. And we're going to talk about him later too, but where he's running and where he stands with the team right now. And so we saw the same with Calvin Austin during his rookie season, had the foot injury. So it's never good to have a setback, even a minor one, even if you're only missing a couple weeks, because that is valuable practice. You only get so much of that practice time. It only lasts for a matter of weeks, and then you are jumping into the season. Like the NFLPA is very, very strict on how much contact you're allowed to have, how much practice time you're allowed to have. So missing that is a big deal. We could be looking at half of training camp for Roman Wilson here. So we'll see how that impacts him ultimately when he finally gets back on the field. All right, Shayne, let's talk about Russell Wilson here. Biggest player on the Steelers to talk about, at least during the offseason, because he's the quarterback of this team. He's expected to be the starting quarterback of the Steelers, regardless of what you think of Justin Fields and whether or not he deserves that shot. The Steelers have made it very clear that Wilson is the guy that is in pole position of this job. That didn't change, according to Mike Tomlin in his presser at training camp. And Wilson's finally seeing the field now. I believe that he didn't do, and I'm still not caught up with everything from today's practice, Shayne, but I believe that he still wasn't a full participant in team sessions, but he did all of the drills with his teammates. And so he's trending towards the right direction. Obviously, Wilson had this calf injury. So bizarre because it's like, oh yeah, my veteran quarterback, my 35-year-old quarterback woke up with a calf injury. I'm like, how do you just wake up with a calf injury? I'm 35. I know what it's like, but I have never woke up with a neck
apparently
injury.
It was a sled. He was pushing a sled, and that's how he hurt
that's
his calf.
That was the latest report. So
So like,
I wonder why
it
was reported that way at first, that he woke up with it rather than it was with the sled, unless he's like, oh yeah, this is where it came from. So,
well, I mean, maybe he didn't tell them that until he woke. He maybe didn't hit him until he woke up with it, and then he's like, oh well, the sled is probably why. Like,
which begs the question, like, why is my aging quarterback out there pushing a sled? Like, where does it?
That sounds like something he would just do
I
on
want?
I don't.
I don't want Russell Wilson or Justin Fields ever out blocking for somebody. You get your body in the way, but that's a quarterback. I mean, you can't have your quarterback getting injured. So I know some people were calling for the firing there of the strength and conditioning coach. I don't know. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's an interesting decision either way. So let's talk about Wilson's injury here for a minute. He's a veteran. He's been in this situation a dozen times roughly. And so he knows how to play football. He knows he's going to get up to speed really quickly. I have no doubt. I think the only thing here, Shayne, that the biggest angle is Justin Fields got all of these reps, not Russell Wilson. And so does that level the playing field a little bit there at all? And then when you look at chemistry, it's like chemistry is important. Russell Wilson is on a new team.
Yep.
He needs to figure out how to utilize George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth. It's not a lot of lost time because, again, we're talking about 4 unpadded practices. We're 2 days into padded practices now. How would you level like the impact of his lost time with the Steelers so far?
I think it's much more impactful for Fields than it is for Wilson because it just gave Fields a runway to be like, this is what I'm about. Let me show what I can do in full practice time, because he wasn't going to get that with Wilson, right? Like, even if they did try to split the reps early or just try to give them both like a runway to kind of get comfortable, it was not going to be to the same level that Fields has gotten over the past 6 practices, right? And I think it's really important for the Steelers also. Like, this could end up being kind of a blessing in disguise for not just Fields, but for the Steelers, because the more time you have to watch him, how he practices, what he needs to work on, what things he's doing well, what he's not, it gives them the ability to go, okay, if Wilson goes down, struggles, whatever it is, we're much more prepared to insert him into the lineup and know what we're getting out of him in that situation, right? And it also gives them more information to build upon for if they want to try to bring him back after this year, right? Because if he doesn't see the field, he's not going to get this massive contract from somebody, at least I doubt it. You could probably bring him back for a year or two relatively cheaply and give him the chance to play then possibly. Or again, still be in another situation like this where they bring in competition or whatever it ultimately is. But I think for Fields, it's really important to get these reps now while he can.
Yeah, and I think assuming that Wilson doesn't suffer a setback or anything that way, this is not, I mean, it's really not a bad situation to have Fields get a ton of work early in training camp because he's probably going to go back down to getting the second most reps. He'll still get reps with the first team, I believe, but I think he's going to go primarily to those second team reps. So I liked getting that sample size of seeing Fields. And what's encouraging was that even though he wasn't very consistent early on, yesterday was his best day of practice. Really I believe he completed every pass in team sessions, just had a really good day overall. And so you like to see that, especially that he got that type of day in just before Russell Wilson came back to the field. So the injury seems minor. I think they are erring on the side of caution. I think that if it was a game day situation, Wilson would have practiced and played. And so it's not that big of a deal. But I understand every time you're dealing with a soft tissue injury, and we just saw Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers suffer Achilles tears last year, right around the same age as Russell Wilson. I did as well, ironically.
Yeah, it was the year of the Achilles for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, it really was. And so just knowing all the factors there, like there's no reason to rush him out there at all.
Even the Burrow situation where it was just a calf injury that kept bothering him. Like that's the type of thing that's probably
closer, shut down your season eventually with it.
Probably closer to what Wilson's dealing with. It's closer to that. Not as bad, I don't think, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's the type of thing you want to avoid because if it goes, it's never going to be right until you have a full offseason to recover. And then it's,
for sure. It's just not worth messing around with. You better play it safe. And so the Steelers are going to go from there. And it looks like he'll be ready to get back up to full speed here pretty soon. Shayne, I did want to talk about Cole Holcomb today too. And I'm not sure if you saw this report yet or not. But Jerry Dulac had a chat transcript. I don't know why that is so hard.
It is kind of a hard thing.
It's a tongue twister. So he had fans chime in and ask questions. A few of them were pertaining to veteran linebacker Cole Holcomb, where he stands right now, like what's the deal with him. And he essentially did not guarantee that Holcomb's going to be on the Steelers roster. He said there's a chance that Holcomb gets waived before the start of the season, and that he's nowhere near ready to go, I think were his words. And so not the encouraging sign that you want to see from that. It's not overly surprising considering the preemptive moves the Steelers made. Obviously, they spent a lot of money on Patrick Queen. They spent a third-round pick on Peyton Wilson, All-American linebacker in the draft. So they're prepared, I think, to move on from Holcomb if need be. But I am disappointed to hear that because we really didn't know before this. Like we had seen Holcomb working out in the weight room. We didn't know where the knee was exactly, but I would have loved to have like just a solid and deep group of four with Landon Roberts, Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, and Cole Holcomb. Like that gives you so much flexibility, so much depth if there were to be an injury. Now we're kind of back to the stage where we were before, where it's like, all right, if a linebacker does go down, I'm playing two guys like 100% of the time. And I don't want to have to rely on the depth outside of that because there's a significant drop off. So what do you make of this injury update, if you will, about Cole Holcomb? And what do you think is going to ultimately happen with him?
It is really unfortunate, like you said, because not only for Holcomb, because obviously you want to see him get back healthy. He's had injury issues in the past. It's been one of the things that's kind of plagued him, even though he has been a really good player for the most part when he's been able to be out there. For the Steelers, it takes you from having maybe one of the deepest linebacker groups and like the diversity of skill sets in the league to a really good but still flawed in some ways linebacker group, because Roberts is the pure run stuffer, like big body guy. Wilson is a rookie, so you can expect him to be good in coverage, I think, but I think the run diagnostics and trying to be a good run defender is probably not going to be there for him right away, at least in my opinion, watching him.
Yeah.
And then you have Patrick Queen, who is unbelievably talented, but it's at different times in his career, and I still think this will show up a little bit more than it did the last couple of years, is a bit of a heat-seeking missile and not much else in the run game. He's more of a chase and tackle guy and not going to diagnose a lot of stuff. So you really only have one true run defender in that group right now, if Holcomb's not there, because I do think Holcomb is a better run defender than the other two that would be out there without Roberts. It just gives you more skill sets out there and options, especially in the event that Queen goes down. Wilson could be a 3-down player early, but again, I don't know if he'd be as good as Holcomb obviously would be if he's healthy as well. So it's just disappointing for the player, and then also just for the depth and the ability to do all the different things as a linebacker. You lose a lot of that if Holcomb's not out there.
Yeah, and we saw just a fiasco last year. Like the worst case scenario at the linebacker position happened. Holcomb went down with that gruesome knee injury.
Yeah.
And then Quan Alexander the very next week.
I think it was literally the next week. Yeah,
gone for the season. And so already right then you're down to Elandon Roberts, who by trade is the downhill down thumping linebacker, was forced into a bigger role. And Roberts did really well. I'm going to give him credit.
He was fighting for his life out there.
Yeah,
at times. He really was.
But then you're picking guys up off the street, and you're playing Miles Jack, and you're playing guys who have no business being on NFL rosters anymore. That really hurt their defense, and the Steelers can't find themselves in a situation. And that's why I was so optimistic prior to hearing this, Shayne, that all right, if Holcomb is ready to go by the start of the season or early in the season, that gives you're 4 deep at linebacker. Like name me another team that is 4 deep the way the Steelers are 4 deep at linebacker, and they haven't been this way in a really long time. And so I was certainly optimistic about that. I'm not giving up hope yet because, again, it's just from a chat transcript. I'm trying to get right this time. And we don't know exactly what the situation is. I think we'll know later on in camp. If it ends up being a case, Shayne, where, the Steelers are just going to cut their losses, get out of this 3-year, $18 million contract of Holcomb's, will they go out and sign another body to replace him? I assume. Right now, I think that we'll talk about the linebacker position here soon, but Mark Robinson's not that guy. He just, after what we've seen of him early on,
I don't think so.
I mean, Matakavage is a special teamer by trade. Yes. So it does beg that question. Like if Holcomb's not there, will they go and sign a guy?
I feel like the problem with it is I think 3 linebackers are theoretically enough to have just 3 true linebackers that are active. And having a 4th is a special team. I think a lot of teams will end up doing that this year, so they wouldn't be alone if they do that. However, we saw what happened when you're in the middle of the season and you lose 2 guys. There's not a lot of options. There's not a lot of guys you can go to and go, this guy can play 60% of the snaps and not get killed most of the time. It just doesn't really have. Linebacker is a hard enough position as it is for modern day guys. It's why it's kind of getting devalued. Not that it isn't great to have a great one, it's that there just isn't many of them. So it's kind of like just get a regular old linebacker in there. We have guys who I think can be above average linebackers, but again, the drop off from Patrick Queen to Tyler Matakavich is a cliff. It's not just that's not really going to work if you need to do that. So they probably should at least explore that option to see if there's somebody that can be a guy that can play special teams if you need him to, but is an actual linebacker and can play. I don't really know off the top of my head who would be available out there, but that is something they should definitely explore if they know for sure that Holcomb is not going to be a part of the group this year.
Yeah, and Shayne, I've comped them before to the running backs of the defense. They
pretty
take
much
such a beating on their bodies that their careers don't last as long as they used to. And teams, I think, are, I don't want to say wising up, that they're kind of older linebackers are kind of getting thrown off the pile, and they're drafting and replacing them with fresher guys. So we'll see what ends up ultimately happening there, and we'll touch on that position more in just a little bit here. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain Podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. And if you guys are here joining us in the live chat, please drop a question for us in the YouTube live chat over here. And Shayne and I would love to get an answer for you if we have one. All right, Shayne, we're going to talk about all of our Steelers training camp notes. And I say notes in quotations because you and I are not there. We've not been there yet. We're trying to get a date to come there. But we're scouring the internet. We're looking all over the Twitterverse and coming up with everything that we can find and using other sources to kind of make determinations about everything that's going on, reading practice reports from Alex Kozora and seeing tweets from Nick Farba, Penn Live. And so we're compiling everything that we see out there to give you these notes. So I want that to be clear. We typically do make it down there. At least I make it down there pretty much every year. I think there was one year in the last 9 years that I haven't been to Steelers training camp. And so I always love to go and get my own bird's eye view. But we're telling you what we have secondhand right now of everything that we know. And trust me, we do a lot of research. I sit at my computer for like 8 to 10 hours a day, just looking at stuff. And so this is all that we know so far. And Shane, I thought of a couple different ways to do this. I thought we could talk about all the players, the top performers and the bottom performers, but I think it's best just to go position by position. And that way we don't leave any notable names out here. So we're going to do it like Madden style, and we're going to go right down through the list. And we'll talk about all these guys. Speaking of Madden, they released their edge defender rankings today. Shayne, Watt was third on the list. Didn't surprise me, just based on like the narrative of everything right now, behind Micah Parsons and Myles Garrett. Any thoughts on that?
I think with Madden, I've noticed this year so far, looking at the ratings, it's basically like they didn't watch football for the past like 2 years in some cases. Like a lot of the guys who are rated in like the 90s at the positions, and like they have not been that type of player in like multiple seasons. I'm not talking about the edge rushers really. The edge rushers are actually kind of closer to what I might have expected. But some other positions, I'm like Kevin Byard, I think is like an 89. I'm like, he has not been an 89 in like a while. Yeah. Like I don't. But anyway, besides Madden, like with the Madden thing too, with ratings, like TJ is the highest he's rated I think ever, maybe, to start a Madden, which is interesting, but also like just in terms of his overall, I don't know about ranking it among edge rushers, but with Madden, I will say guys like Garrett and Parsons are going to rate higher because of their physical traits that they're given. Like it just is a given. Like not that TJ isn't a fantastic athlete, but Parsons and Garrett, like in terms of testing and numbers, are just a different level of player in terms of that. So they are going to get a boost just from that as well. But again, that's what I expected him to land around 3 or 4, because that's what everyone seems to have him at lately. So,
yeah. And for those who don't know, Watt is beginning Madden 25 with a 97 overall rating. Garrett and Parsons 98. I think the bigger snub out of all of this, when it comes to Madden, Shayne, is that I think Watt's probably going to get snubbed from ever making the 99 club there.
Oh, I don't think he ever will.
I mean. No. Yeah, I mean, he's entering age 30 season. So if he doesn't do it in the next year or so, like it's probably not happening. So it's funny because a player of his magnitude and all the records he's going to crush, you would think that he would get that once, but
and I think it comes down to like, again, I think they could max out all of his like the moves and all the other stuff, but again, he doesn't have the same athleticism scores.
Their formula when you put it all together.
You'd have to boost up his like speed and acceleration when it's not getting better at 30 years old. So like, I don't think he'll ever reach it for that reason, honestly. Like I just don't think he'll ever do it. So, but
it makes sense.
Yeah, it is what it is. But yeah.
All right. Do you any questions you want to get to here?
Before we did have one chat before we get, and we're going to talk about this a little bit too. What are they doing with this O-line? From Jay here, playing around with Dan Moore and Nate Herbig when they have a chance to get Frazier, Jones, and Fatani ready to go. I do think, from what I've read, and we'll talk about the offensive line more when we get there as well, so we'll talk about this as well. But the Fatanu thing, he's switching from left to right. I think they want to get him comfortable with that. Moore is not a right tackle, so they're playing him at left in camp right now still. Jones is still transitioning back from right to left. Like I think the plan is still gonna be to get Fatanu to the right, Jones to the left, Moore to the bench. I do think that's the plan. It's kind of what they've said as far as I can tell. I just think it's not happening right away because of their way of doing that type of stuff. But I'm not worried about Moore. Herbig, I'll be honest, if he's just better than Frazier is right now, I'm okay with him playing over him. We'll talk about what Frazier's done in camp in a minute, but that I'm less worried about because it is what it is. But Moore should be forced to learn right tackle on no other occasion. He's just apparently terrible at it. Just not that he's great at left tackle, but for everything we've heard is like he just straight up can't do it. Some guys can't do it. It's not a given. And like Madden, we were just talking about, you can't just flip guys from left to right and center, whatever. It doesn't work that way for a lot of guys. If you're great, like Fatanu, athletically, you probably can. If you're Jones, you can. Moore, not so much. So I think it's probably better to play him in a position he's at least capable of playing. But
hold that thought, Jay, and stay with us because I'm going to go on a rant when we get to the offensive line.
We will talk about it. But that's what. All
right, let's start with the quarterback position, Shayne, and we'll work our way through. And so we've talked about the top two guys already a little bit here. What do you make of Justin Fields' performance so far? I know he's had his ups and downs. If you ask anybody out there, any of the media that's on hand watching from the sidelines, they will tell you that he looks better passing the ball deep than he does in the short and intermediate stuff, which is, again, story of Fields' career there. You can watch any of his tape. in Chicago, and that's basically what we see with him as there as well. Accuracy has always been an issue. And so my overall thoughts, Shayne, on Fields is that you don't want to, this is training camp setting, first of all. So obviously you have to try to work from structure, but don't take away what Fields does best. Like if Fields actually gets out on the field for you, let him scramble, let him run, let him extend the play and make Fields plays down the throws down the field, because that is where he does best. And so he's always going to do his best work from that situation, not from the pocket. So I'm not too concerned about how he looks as just like this true, like going through your read, progression, pocket passing quarterback. That's not his game at all. And I don't expect it to be. Is that the same feel that you are getting from Fields at camp?
From all the clips I've seen, that's generally where we're at, is that he's still very much the player that he was billed as, which is a super athletic, dynamic downfield thrower that still needs a lot of work in dissecting and throwing the ball short intermediate. That's where he's going to have to change his game if he wants to be a starting quarterback consistently in the NFL. It doesn't have to be great. He does not have to be a top 15 pocket passing quarterback. He just needs to be a capable one, and he just hasn't been through most of his career. When you dial up a deep shot for him, when you throw play action out there, when you get him on the move, he's going to make big plays. Like he's done it consistently at times throughout his career. Like that stuff is going to work. But as Tomlin obviously likes to say, like you have to make the routine plays routinely, right? He does not do that right now. Generally speaking, has not done that in his career. If Arthur Smith can get him to do more of that and to make some more reads past his first read, which that's been the biggest thing with him. You look at Darnell Mooney last year, and I was watching some Falcons stuff, and that's why I'm thinking of it. He was one of the best separators in the NFL last year on a per target, like a per route basis. Did not see the football because he was the second target now that DJ Moore was there. That's kind of the biggest thing you can look at and go, yeah, like Justin Fields just doesn't always look to a second guy. And when you're that dynamic of an athlete, when you can throw the ball down the field the way he can, it doesn't always matter, but it certainly mattered enough where the Bears no longer wanted him to be the quarterback, right? So I think what he's shown is exactly what he's been. So until he shows us something different, it doesn't really change my opinion that while he has more upside than Wilson, he has more flaws in his game overall than Wilson probably does at this point.
Yeah, and I'm a Justin Fields fan. You know that I liked him coming out of the 2021 draft. I had him significantly higher than Mac Jones and Trey Lance. Like he was my number 2 overall player behind Trevor Lawrence. Didn't pan out the way that I expected. And the reason why I'm down on him from an accuracy and progression standpoint, Shayne, is when you are going into year 4 and you have not made these adjustments, there's very little chance. We basically know the player you are at this point. It's not that he can't be a player that leads this team to some success, but rarely do you suddenly become much more accurate or go through your progressions much better at this stage of your career. It has to happen early on. And typically you can see that. Like Jordan Love gets an opportunity and you can see what he's got. And CJ Stroud, from his rookie season, you can see that him go through his progressions and see his accuracy. We've not seen that in 3 years from Justin Fields. And so it doesn't surprise me that in year 4, he's struggling in the same areas. Now I'm still optimistic that if he comes into the game, he can provide a spark. He can chew up a 30-yard gain like it's nothing. Throw the ball down the field and find Pickens routinely. So that kind of stuff he can do. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on this quarterback competition, obviously, as we go on, because both of these guys, and you can make a case for either one. Like, I either want Wilson because of the veteran presence and everything that he's done in his career, or you want Fields because you think that he's the more dynamic player, offers more hope for the future. So there's an argument to be made for both quarterbacks here. And we can't really speak on Wilson's performance, obviously, because
he hasn't
really done anything yet.
Worth talking about. But we expect it to be Wilson-esque of like, he's a professional, he's going to do well in practice, he's going to do the right things. It's just, there's certain things with him at this point that aren't going to be there like it used to be.
Now, Shayne, do you think that from Mike Tomlin and the Steelers coaching staff perspective, did Fields do anything in like those first 5 practices to kind of bridge the gap of that quarterback competition? Or do you think that it's just the same size as it was before?
I don't think it's changed significantly at all. Maybe a little bit just because he has performed well in camp. But again, like we talked about, I like to think, at least you hope, that the front office and the coaching staff also knows his deficiencies and what he is and isn't good at based on the tape watch and watching him with the Bears when they decided to trade for him. Like, I think the plan here was, okay, we have a high variance backup that we can do some stuff and build an offense around a little bit if Wilson isn't the guy, right? I do think that was ultimately the main thing they were trying to accomplish here is let's not have a statuesque pocket passer be our only hope of moving the offense. Let's get somebody who we can scheme some stuff up for, do some fun stuff if Wilson isn't the answer, right? And that's what I still kind of think they view him as. And again, he hasn't done anything so far to make them feel differently about him. And until he does, I do think he's going to have a hard time catching up with Wilson until he can do more of the veteran quarterback type of things you want to see from a fourth-year guy.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that assessment. I don't think that their view of the quarterback position has really changed based on Fields' performance because it is so early, because we had 4 unpadded practices before the pads went on, and Fields really only had one really good, really strong day so far in the early session here in this first week of training camp.
Yeah.
So I do think that it's something worth noting, and it's great for him to get those reps, but we'll obviously keep monitoring as we go on. And let's talk about the backups really quickly here. Shayne, Kyle Allen had a pretty strong start to practice. I heard that yesterday, everybody said was his worst day of practice. And so definitely, though, has a clear and obvious lead on John Rice Plumlee, who I don't think is going to end up being on the Steelers roster. He was drafted, what was it, 2nd or 3rd overall pick in
something like that
in the UFL draft.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe that's where his career goes after this. Maybe he lands on the practice squad with the Steelers. But there are 3 positions. Like if we were to make that roster prediction, I had one come out actually this morning. So go check it out on stillcurtain.com. But those are your 3 quarterbacks for the Steelers this year. I feel very confident about that. Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, and Kyle Allen. Those are the 3.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Allen, he's a veteran. He started games. They at least feel like if he had to play, he's not going to make a mess of himself on the field. I think that's probably what would happen for Plumlee, unfortunately, is, undrafted rookie. I do expect him to be a very good UFL player, though, if he does take that route, if it doesn't work out. So.
All right, Shayne, let's move on. Talk about the running back position here. We've got this 2-headed monster here at running back with Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. Everybody's interested, who's going to get the workload here? I mean, we can assume that it's going to be Najee getting more touches than Warren because of the frame, because of just the type of player that he is, the situational downhill runner. But Warren obviously has been the more efficient player of the 2. It's going to be a collection of both. And I think that one of the biggest talking points with Najee is when he came to camp, it looked like he was trying to evade the press for a little bit there. And then he comes back out and talks to them later. He did voice his frustration with not getting the 5th-year option picked up, which is understandable. If a team doesn't believe in you after drafting you in the first round, not to pick up a 5th-year option worth $6.79 million, very reasonably priced compared to the market of running backs in the league. You have to wonder why, and it makes me wonder what thoughts are going through his head at this point. And you can see already, when the pads came on, they weren't taking it easy on Najee. This is a guy you got to get your body in the mix. You got to show that you're capable of running Arthur Smith's offense and being that guy. So how do you see that distribution with those first 2 guys? Do you have any thoughts on them early in training camp so far?
It does look like both backs have been very good. Warren is going to look better in these types of scenarios because he's just the more explosive, more just dynamic running back in terms of in space. So in camp practices, he's going to look better, right? I would argue he's probably looked like the better camp player since he got here, right? That's just kind of how that works for guys like him. But I do think that if Najee has committed to kind of slimming down a little bit, which again, I don't know what his weight is listed at this point. I know that it was reported that he slimmed down a good bit for this year. I do think these 2 can have a similar workload share they had last year, and it be just more effective than it had been in the past. But what Najee said about his contract situation and what happened with that, again, I kind of point to I think even though they like Najee, I really do think the front office would like to keep him for the long term. They need to see that he can actually produce in this offense. And right now, Warren, just from what we know about the 2 players, has a leg up on him in terms of the efficiency, not just in the past, but what I think he'll be in this offense in a more wide zone, traditional outside zone running game. If Najee can adapt to that and still provide the same value he's provided the first 3 years of his career, then he's probably going to be back on a decent contract with them after this year. If he doesn't, and if the front office's worries, which I do think are real, are right, then he's probably going to be looking for another team and maybe a better fit for him anyway, right? That's the ultimate thing he has to decide too is this offense a good fit for me? Because as we know, it's probably going to be this offense for the next 3 or 4 years because we don't fire guys unless they're Matt Canada. Even that takes 2.5 years. So it's not going to change anytime soon, probably. So he has to make sure that he's a good fit, and also the front office has to do that as well.
Yeah, and I just putting like a chances on him making the roster again next year, Steelers signing him to another contract, I think it's really slim for a couple of reasons, because Jaylen Warren's there. He's the younger, more explosive player, and you got two guys that need a contract. I think it's unreasonable to get both of them signed, but not impossible, like you said. And so I think that depending on his performance, if he shows that he's a great fit, maybe they try to fork up and keep both guys, or maybe they choose Najee over Warren. I would be a little bit surprised by that.
Yeah,
all things considered. Yeah, and just feel like Warren just feels like the better fit for this scheme too. The wide zone where he can go west before he goes north and south, and so I think that he's going to be a good fit with that. I think the biggest, though, when it comes to actual camp storylines with the running back position, I think the biggest thing here is it surrounds the player that hasn't even seen the field yet. Is Cordarrelle Patterson.
Yeah,
because Patterson is going to be the Steelers' third running back this year, but more importantly, he has to be that kick return specialist. We've got the new kickoff rules this year. I don't know if there's many guys who can field that position outside of Patterson. Now, it looks like in line and drills is Jaylen Warren behind him. I would prefer Warren not have to do that. I know the injury risk is lessened because guys are only lining up 5 yards apart at this point. But I don't want any unnecessary shots to Warren potentially in that role. Then outside of Warren, it's like, do we have anybody that can man this role? Are you going to put Roman Wilson back there maybe if he's healthy? Because you're probably not putting Najee in that position to field kickoffs. So Cordarrelle Patterson is kind of the talk of the running back position for me, because I'd like to see him get out there. And we know that he's experienced. He's probably going to be a Hall of Fame return man, one of the best to ever do the kick return position. But I want to see him in that role, getting those reps with his team. And it'll be interesting to see when that finally comes, when he's off the NFI list, when he's healed from that hamstring injury. Outside of that group, Shayne, I'm not impressed by anybody, and I didn't really expect to be. The one that disappoints me a little bit is I was hoping that Dejon Edwards would get a little bit more work, because I'm always more excited about like these undrafted rookies that can come in. Maybe you can be the next Jaylen Warren, or maybe. That's so rare, like to get a Jaylen Warren type player or Mike Hilton type player, whatever it may be, as that undrafted player who comes in and performs super well, is very rare. We are going to talk about one of them later here in the defensive backfield, so I'm excited to talk about him. But right now, just looking at the scope of things, it's like, yeah, maybe like P. Ryan makes the roster if Cordarrelle Patterson isn't ready to go. And if he is, then I don't think any of this group does.
No, I think it's Patterson. He just needs to get healthy and figure that out. And the kick return rules thing is definitely going to be interesting to see what they do with that if it isn't Patterson for any reason, like if it's due to injury or something else. Because obviously you want an explosive guy, but like now more so you want a powerful player, because there's going to be a lot more tackles that can actually be broken and not just getting run into at full speed and trying to make guys miss all the time. Like it's more of a running play now than anything else. Like it's not quite, but it's much closer to running play than it's ever been. So I think having a running back type of build back there is important, whether it's Patterson or someone else. So.
Yeah, and I think that would explain why Calvin Austin is not in the kick return.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know about.
You do have to have a certain frame. Kick returns and punt returns are very different.
They are very different.
There are select few guys who can do both, but you even go back to some of like the all-time greats. Like Josh Cribbs was an amazing kick returner, but he wasn't that punt returner. So, and it's the same for Cordarrelle Patterson. Like Patterson is a Hall of Fame level kick returner, but has rarely fielded punts in his career, and so that's just not what he does. It's a totally different. It's like a kicker and a punter, like two totally separate things here. Anything else before we move on to the next position here, Shayne?
No, I think that there's some comments that we've gotten, but like especially the Fields Russ situation, we got some from our friend R Barley 18 here. Russ injuries being milked so they can get a hard look at Fields. That'd be funny. I'm sure Wilson would probably have something to say about that. The Fields needs a decision made ASAP. I can see someone desperate giving him 140. Yeah, this I know the quarterback contracts are getting crazy. A backup who wasn't that good last time he started and didn't play is not. I don't think you have to worry about that. They're not getting this much money. I would say closer to $10 million a year as a backup starter hybrid than anything like this. I don't think any team's that desperate at this point, even though we've seen some stuff like that. But I wouldn't worry too much about that.
I would think it would have to take a lot for him, probably even to just get like the Daniel Jones level contract.
Yeah, he'd have to play this year and also be like pretty good.
There's so many factors that have to go in. Like you can't ignore what he did his last year in Seattle, the last 2 years in Denver. He turns 36 during the season this year. And so if it's not like really impressive, I do think that he either probably ends up taking a job as a backup somewhere, or he gets a low level contract would be my guess. Is like nothing is impossible. We've seen teams do some really bizarre things, stupid things, I would say at times, but we'll see what ends up happening there. I want to throw Jack Coletto in here too. Let's throw him in with the running back, Shayne, fullback, the only true fullback on the roster. I think there's a chance that this guy actually has a chance to make the team based on Arthur Smith's history, knowing that he likes to use fullbacks, 3 tight ends, whatever it is. I don't think that it's a great chance because I still think that in most cases, what a tight end can do, they can also play that role of the fullback as well. If you need Michael Pruitt or Connor Hayward to do that, those H-back type players are more versatile fullbacks essentially. Now, Coletto might be the better run blocker than either of those guys, but do you keep a true fullback as opposed to a guy that offers more versatility, more in the passing game, can put him in more alignments? Like, I still think that probably the most likely scenario is the Steelers keep 4 tight ends and not Coletto. But it is interesting to note that he's getting some work with the first team offense. He's getting thrown in there as that true fullback when you're running that 21 personnel. So what do you make of him at all, Shayne?
I love fullbacks. I'm one of those guys that like kind of misses that they're part of the game in some ways, but also I understand why they aren't for the most part. However, Connor Hayward is too good at too many things for him not to make this team, in my opinion. And I think that's a death sentence for Coletto. I don't think you can, because I don't think Michael Pruitt's getting cut. That's kind of Arthur Smith's guy. He was able to bring one true his guy right with him, and it was him. I don't see him going by the wayside. And he's a good enough player to make the team, of course. I think he's kind of just the odd man out in that situation. I think they want to see if he's so good at the true fullback role that it's worth maybe not keeping a Pruitt or a Hayward, which again I think is unlikely, but whatever. But I don't see much coming from it personally. So
yeah, I think that that's the case for him as well, Shayne. So if we hear more about that, we'll talk about him maybe down the road here, and we'll see how he performs in the preseason. I think that'll be big. His path to the roster, I think, is totally hinging on the health of the tight end position. Even though it's not his position, if Pruitt or Hayward goes down, then there's a path there's not right now. Sure. Let's talk about wide receiver. Shayne, this has been the biggest question mark outside of maybe just the quarterback position all offseason long for the Steelers. We know George Pickens is going to be that guy for them. He's obviously their go-to target there. It is just a crapshoot outside of that. Like, I don't know where the Steelers are going. I do want to note the pecking order kind of in training camp is Pickens and Calvin Austin are kind of leading the charge in these drills. If you ask Pickens, he would say that him and Calvin Austin are going to do things this year. Van Jefferson is up there as well. So when you're looking at, I think today's practice, it was Pickens and Jefferson who were the first two out there in 2 receiver sets and 3 receiver sets. Calvin Austin's out there as well. Kind of been mixing them around. All 3 of them have played, some in the slot, some outside. And so that looks to be that starting group as of now. Obviously, I think that Roman Wilson was on their heels already prior to the ankle injury. When you consider this now, this is a little bit of a setback for him. He's probably not going to have a huge role right away. He's going to have to earn that back. What do you make of that group so far, Shayne? And then what about the best of the rest? Like, is there any other guys that you think should be part of this group outside of that with Quez Watkins and Scotty Miller? It's a pretty unspectacular group overall here.
Yeah, I really think the 3 guys you mentioned are really the only 3 that are probably going to have a major role outside of injuries, especially if Wilson gets back healthy and supplants one of those 3. Pickens is obviously the number 1 guy. He's going to be getting the most targets on this team almost assuredly. He's going to be the guy that they have to rely on for a lot of their big plays, especially, I think, too. Jefferson, he had some hype with the Rams for a couple of years there, and then the Falcons' tenure last year when he made his move over there just didn't really go well. So I'm not expecting a ton from him. I could see it being a little bit better of an Allen Robinson type of thing, where it's like he's a little bit more effective as an actual receiver, but he's really kind of just out there because somebody else has to be out there. And then Austin is the wild card here. I think what he can do both from the slot and outside, hopefully, like I mentioned, before, is going to be the biggest X factor outside of Roman Wilson when he's healthy and playing, right? That's kind of the biggest thing that I'm looking for is what can Austin do now in his third season when he's seemingly having the best camp he's had. Obviously, the injury his rookie season kind of derailed any hope of that anyway, but especially based on last year's performance, like can he ascend to being a true starting caliber receiver? And if he can't, like you said, now you're hoping Wilson's ready as a third-round pick. You're hoping one of the Scotty Miller, Quez Watkins grab bag of guys is also good enough as well. I don't see it with those guys. I think they're kind of just deep threats that are semi-effective at times. You need to see one of these, especially the 4 guys who we expect to play the most once Wilson's back. They need to carry this group.
Yeah, there are 2 guys that offer hope on the roster outside of Pickens at the wide receiver position. Yeah. It's Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson. Like I've seen enough of Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller. Like we know who those guys are. Yeah. They've played their best seasons in the NFL, in my opinion. And you said it, Van Jefferson, you're hoping to get maybe an Allen Robinson plus type guy, which is really low.
It's kind of where we're at.
That's just kind of his game. He can play in the slot, can play outside, but it's just not spectacular at anything really at this stage. Mm-hmm. So I think one of those guys is going to have to step up. And if not, that's why everybody comes back to, should the Steelers trade for a wide receiver? I think the question is justified. Preferably, the best case scenario is one of those guys just completely outperforms expectations. You get to hold on to high draft capital and still be competitive and find a capable wide receiver too, if not like a high-end wide receiver 3. Let's talk about the tight end position here, Shayne. We'll keep things moving relatively quickly because this is going to end up being a longer show. Tight end, pretty strong group overall. Arthur Smith's offense, I want to throw this in as we talk about the tight end position because it looks like Pat Freiermuth could get a big uptick in targets this year. Obviously, has suffered the hamstring injury last year, so missed time, banged up. He has a history of concussions, all of that. There comes the question of should the Steelers sign Freiermuth to an extension? And actually, that was addressed by Josh Yorish on the Monday show. So if you want to hear what he had to say about that, you can go out and check his podcast on Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube here. Check out his live show from Monday. That's a topic for a different day for us, Shayne. But what do you make of this group overall? I know Washington has kind of had his ups and downs, but is coming off of a really strong practice from everything that we've heard and we've seen. Made a really nice 17-yard catch across the middle of the field, is blocking well, held up well in the backs on backers drill. What do you make of this group overall?
I think that their current group of guys is about as good of a group of skill sets that you can get if you don't have a truly elite tight end, which not many teams do. Obviously, I think Pat is a step below some of those very top guys. If you don't have one of those guys, then having a player like Freiermuth, who is a pure receiving threat that can block a little bit, but is really more of a big receiver type of guy that's going to make tough catches, going to run after the catch well. It's very fluid mover, not the most explosive necessarily, but again, very fluid, can get out in space good. Darnell Washington, who's just a big mountain of a man who can block just about anybody, it feels like, at least potentially. Does still have some build-up speed. You could use him as a red zone threat. Hopefully they'll do that more this year. And then you have your Pruitt and Hayward combo of kind of H-backy, guys that can do a little bit of everything, but aren't necessarily true tight ends in the same way that a Freiermuth or Washington is. So it's a really good group. I think that you can do just about anything with them is the point here. And I think that's what Smith wanted to do with them, is have all these skill sets together. And I'm not going to be surprised if we see a lot of, especially 2 tight end sets, but maybe even 3 tight end sets at times as well. So,
yeah, I think we're looking at a bunch of Freiermuth and Washington on the field together. Yeah. I think that that Washington is still going to be a minimal part of the passing game.
Yeah, I don't expect him to ever be. He's never going to be a volume guy. Yeah.
No, he's still a generally stiff player, just because he's so huge. I mean, you're 6'7", 260 pounds. You're kind of like a hybrid between a tackle and a tight end. And so I think that Freiermuth, though, do you foresee him having a career year this year in Arthur Smith's offense?
I think when you factor in the receiver situation, I would be very surprised if he doesn't have at least numbers wise a career year, of course. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the problem with it ultimately is I don't know how much this team's going to throw the football. I really don't. Yeah. It's really hard to tell at this point because obviously, ideally, I think they don't want to throw the ball very often. at least not in like a try to move the offense down the field in the passing game way. Maybe trying to get big plays off play action, get ahead of the chains, that type of stuff. But I think they want about as close to 50-50 as you get in the NFL anymore, which is probably like 55-45 pass run. Like, I think that's the goal. And if that's the case, Freiermuth could be the second leading receiver and still not kind of reach his like 700 and some yards he had in his best season. So I think he should have his most effective season in terms of making the offense good. But I don't know if it's going to be a true like numbers best season of his career. It just kind of depends on the volume there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we talked about the other guys a little bit, Connor Hayward, Michael Pruitt. Rodney Williams was dealing with an AC joint sprain in his shoulder. And so just came back on the practice field. But you never, I mean, for a player in his situation, when you're already looking like tight end 5 on the team, like you can't have any setbacks.
Yeah, it's kind of,
he's got a big uphill battle. His is kind of similar to the situation that Coletto is in, maybe even harder for him because he doesn't offer that niche role where at least Coletto does as a true fullback.
Yeah.
So it probably practice squad bound again for Rodney Williams. Let's move to the offensive line here. And Jay, I told you I was going to go on a rant, and I'm going to do that.
I'm
now
excited
because
right.
you brought up a great point. And Shayne, I wrote about this right when I saw it, right at the start of camp. Now, I don't like to overreact to things that happen early in training camp. It's early in training camp. I know how things operate at this point. Like, we've seen a lot of training camps. We've seen a lot of them under Mike Tomlin. He prioritizes and he lets the veterans kind of dictate how things go early on. He will put them out there first, even if it's not necessarily the best option for the team. My philosophy, and I would tend to agree with you, Jay, with your comments here earlier, rip that Band-Aid off, play Broderick Jones at left tackle, get him the reps there, because training camp reps, we talked about how limited they are because of the NFLPA. Put Broderick at left tackle if that is your plan. Put Fautanu in at right tackle, or at the very least, make a guy who says he can't play right tackle anyway, because I think that you're going to want him to be that swing guy. I don't like the finagling of all positions here. I know it's going to happen eventually. Broderick's going to go to left tackle. Fautanu is going to be inserted at right tackle. But why waste these reps? Like, it's, to me, that's my thought, Shayne. And everybody be like, oh, you're overreacting. It's early in training camp. I know that it is. And I know that what's going to happen anyway. But I would rather Broderick Jones get a few hundred more reps at the left tackle position. Fautanu, your first round pick, who you thought was a great, tremendous value falling to you at pick 20, slide him in there at right tackle right away. Don't waste time. Get that continuity going, because there's something to be said for chemistry on the offensive line as well. Kick Dan Moore to the bench where he belongs in year 4 and hasn't gotten any better these last 3 years. Moore's not going to fool you. And I don't care how well he does in training camp or the preseason. This is the guy that he is at this stage in his career. I feel very confident in that. I think he's a really good guy. I like the guy as a person. He's just not a great football player, and he has not improved a lot over the course of his career so far. Plug in your first round picks and make it work. Find a way to make it work. Broderick has already had wasted time where when you finally did insert him into the lineup, not because Moore was bad, but because Okorafor got benched by disciplinary reasons, you plugged him in at right tackle. And you've said to the veteran, I'm going to leave you where you're comfortable, but I'm going to make my first round rookie where he's uncomfortable go play. The whole thing is bizarre to me. Like, Dan Moore must just honestly just have such bad dyslexia or whatever that he can't make it work on the other side. And it infuriates me that they made the decisions they did dating back to last year. Rip that Band-Aid off, play Jones at left tackle, play Fautanu at right tackle, if that is your plan. I'm fine with the plan of playing Fautanu. If you want Fautanu to be your left tackle, I think he's probably going to be better there. But if the plan is to make Broderick a left tackle, play him there now. Don't waste the reps, because you already did that last year. So stop clowning around. That's my thoughts, Shayne. I'll let you have your turn now.
So I don't disagree with anything you said, Tommy. I will say I will start to worry about the situation if by the second preseason game, Fautanu and Jones aren't the left and right tackle, or the whatever order they're going to play. That's when I'll be like, okay, if you can't wait till week 1 to put these guys on the field together. Like, let's do something about this, right? That's when I'll be like, all right, we can't wait anymore. So I'm in the same boat as you. Just I'll give them a little bit more leeway. And I don't know. And we got comments coming in about different things about this. Like, if Moore can't be a swing tackle, I'm not going to say everything we got here. You can read it here. And move up Dylan Cook. It's just indicative of Tomlin's managing the roster pieces. And Faltano has 1 million reps at left tackle. Not sure why they don't just leave Broderick at right tackle. A lot of meddling. That also is a fair point. I do think Faltano is probably better suited to make a full-time switch to a different position than Jones because of all the experience that he has. Whereas Jones did not play nearly as much as Faltano did in college. They don't have quite the same level of just ability to do different things at this point in their careers. I think Jones is still behind Faltano development-wise. So I get that part of it. But like you said, Tommy, we need to see it at some point if that's going to be what week 1 is. If it's not going to be what week 1 is, then I have a lot of problems with it. But for now, my only problem is, again, let's just see these guys do it, in the game situation and in camp. But again, if week 2 of the preseason trots out and Dan Moore is starting left tackle, I could just go ahead and say, yeah, this team doesn't know how offensive line works. That's what I'll say at that point.
Yeah, Shayne, here's why I'm concerned. And again, I don't like to overreact to anything that happens during the preseason, but we know this team.
Right, we know what happens.
Coaching staff, we know their reluctancy to put better players in. We watched Levi Wallace start until the bye week for the Steelers.
That was
when Joey Porter was rotting on the bench as just a situational cornerback. They don't always just because of the Steelers, just because they're in charge of these moves, they don't always make the right move. So I don't have to agree with everything that they do. My philosophy would be, I don't care about seniority. I'm not going to prioritize that. I'm going to put the better player out there, or at the very least, if they're comparable, I know I spent 2 first-round picks on these guys. I want to see what they have because this is my future offensive tackle, not Dan Moore. And so there is a bigger argument. I agree. When we talk about the center position, different argument there for me because I wasn't a huge Zach Frazier fan like a lot of people were. And I think that Nick Herbig deserves a fair shake. This is a mammoth center, 330-pound center here. Plug him in. He's graded out well over the course of his career, albeit primarily at guard. He only has a handful of snaps at center. At least that one is a closer competition that you can say, all right, I can see why you would try Herbig. And believe it or not, Herbig's really young. So he's 25 years old, I think, going into his 6th NFL season. So he's really young. But that I'm confident Frazier's eventually going to win that job out. What one really irritates me, though, is that you refuse to play Broderick Jones at the position you tell us you're going to play him at just because you want to leave Dan Moore out there for whatever reason when you drafted back-to-back offensive tackles in the first round. So I'm done with that. I won't spend any more time with that. What do you make of the rest of the offensive line? I know that people have praised Mason McCormick so far for what he's shown, his intensity, ferocity here at training camp. There has been a lot of false starts, it looks like, from everything that I've seen.
They did clean it up today, I heard, from what I heard.
Which is good. You want to see that go in the right direction. But is there any other names on this offensive line, Shayne, that you want to note before we get to the defensive side of the ball here?
There's one note I wanted to mention, but I will talk about McCormick first here because the thing I like with him too is he's getting the chance to do some snaps and to keep that going because he did that at the All-Star game that he was at, which I think it was the East-West Shrine Bowl for him, I think is where he was at. He showed the ability to play some center. I think that we have 3 legitimate center options right now, which is very different from what we've had the last couple of years since Pouncey was gone. But I do ultimately think Frazier will win this job. I just think that if he doesn't, I don't necessarily think that means it's bad that he didn't, because I do think Herbig is a good player. Maybe he isn't the most ideal center in the world for this type of scheme because he has a bigger center and not one of the more agile ones. But that's not really Frazier's strength either, so I'm not super worried about that. McCormick is the most interesting one, but I do think he's ultimately going to end up being a guard, possibly the James Daniels replacement, if we don't get a new contract for him going. But then Spencer Anderson was the left guard for Ciamella while he was out today. For a veteran day. So that's interesting that he was the first guy in at left guard. He might have a better chance of making this team than maybe we expected with all the new additions. So just there's a lot more things to be excited about, assuming they do the right thing, of course. But there is at least a lot more pieces to be excited about with this line this year.
Yeah, 100%. The depth is better. It's better overall. I mean, it's impossible to argue that on paper that this line is worse than it was last year. If you look back to 3 years ago, 2021, the line is entirely different and better at every single position.
Better,
it was so bad back. They hit an all-time low with that offensive line with Kendrick Green and Trey Turner and Kevin Dotson, who is great in LA, but wasn't as good on the Steelers because of inconsistencies. But yeah, it was rough back then. So looking pretty solid these days. Excited to see the growth of this unit. All right, Shayne, let's move to the defensive side of the ball, and we'll try to spend just a few minutes on each of these here. Let's talk about the interior defensive line. This group obviously headlined by Cameron Hayward. Keanu Benton's going to have a big role this year. You can see that he just oozes with talent. I think that he's going to have maybe that breakout campaign this season. Not really effective from the box score last year, but still had a really impressive year on film. And that's why, it's important to gauge the film for what it is and not just check where players are in terms of where their stats fall. Larry Ogunjobi, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to make of him. I haven't seen a lot from him during training camp so far. I wasn't a big fan of the contract extension they gave him, obviously, last offseason. And then the rest of the group, it makes you wonder, can a guy like Logan Lee, the rookie 6th round pick, 178 overall, I believe, can he make the roster even for the Steelers, considering the depth of this group, and who would he have to beat out? I'm assuming it would be a Leal or Loudermilk type player, and Leal has been like the biggest name on this defensive line so far. Like,
that's what I wanted to mention. Yeah, he's
flashing,
really good,
and we know that he's got some pass rush juice there, a little bit on the leaner side in terms of we compare him to the rest of the guys on that interior unit. But I'm glad to see him finally break out. He's one of the youngest players to come out of the 2022 NFL draft. He was a 5-star recruit, formerly came out during the pre-draft process. At least he was 20 years old following his final college season. So it's nice to see him in year 3 here now kind of have that breakout preseason. Will that be able to translate to the field?
Yeah, with Leal, that's the interesting thing, because I would have said that him and Loudermilk were on similar playing fields in terms of like whether their job was in danger. Leal obviously much more talented, but has been possibly even more disappointing than Loudermilk, considering more draft capital invested in him, better athlete. You expect more from a guy like that. But now it's definitely, I think Lee's biggest competition is Loudermilk. And just to let you guys know, for those who've watched the show for a long time, you know how I am with my Wisconsin guys. I mostly have been very excited for them to join this team for good reason. However, Loudermilk was the one where I was like, I didn't see a whole lot of an NFL player in him when I was watching him in college. So I would like it to be him if anyone gets kind of booted from this group for Lee. But Lee has to prove that he is a better version of Loudermilk, which we will have to wait and see. But yeah, Leal is the guy that, like, hey, maybe this is the year that he can actually provide legitimate depth along the defensive line. And Benton, you mentioned too, you know how I feel about him. For those of you who don't really know what to think of him at this point, if you're able to, go watch the Bills game. I know we lost the playoff game, but he destroyed the Bills' interior offensive line. Like, was unbelievable in that game. That's what you're hoping to see from him going forward. And if you get that version of Benton, Hayward declining may not be as big of a problem as it might be on paper then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about what Leal could potentially offer this team. I liked the original selection, but then I was super discouraged, Shayne, last year when you're in the second half of the season, you're a healthy scratch from the field. I'm like, this is such a bad sign for this guy. Like, I would have given him his chance of making the team very low directly after that season. But now seeing what he's done in the offseason workouts, seeing that translating to training camp here and off to a really explosive start, I think that he's on the inside looking out rather than the other way around. And so I think that Leal's job looks safe at the moment based on where he's falling in the pecking order here along the defensive line and based on his performance. So yeah, I think that it's probably going to come to maybe a choice between Loudermilk and Lee. And interesting, the Steelers have something about this body type. Like they like these 6'5", 6'6" type guys. They don't care that they have average length arms or that they're light in the pants. Like Leal was 274 pounds at the combine.
He was Logan a weird, like, kind of hybrid player. Yeah, they're hybrid.
He was
guys.
Yeah. So I think that in their mind, they're like, oh, we can beef these guys up and we can make them play that. They just don't have the length and the strength that like a Stephon Tuitt did coming out of school. So not the same level of potential in the slightest, but I'll be interested to see what happens there because the Steelers like it. Obviously, we all like it when draft picks can make the team. I just think that it's a long shot for Logan Lee at this point. He's going to have to show a lot more in these next several weeks of camp and during the preseason as well. All right, Shayne, let's move on to the edge rusher position. 3 guys set in stone here. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. TJ Watt is obviously when he's been out there and when he's not limited, because they obviously they limit their star player as you should in training camp. But TJ Watt. No time needed on him. Alex Highsmith still has the wicked cyclone spin move there. Nick Herbig is looking strong so far. Like this is a guy that both you and I liked. Again, you're Wisconsin alum there. So Herbig came off a really good rookie season, did better than anyone expected. Went later in the draft than I expected him to. even with his size deficiency there, because he's just a good player who knows how to get after the quarterback. I think he will offer that pass rush specialist role to the Steelers again this year. The biggest question here, Shayne, is who is this edge for, this outside linebacker for, if you will, for the Steelers? It's looking like Jeremiah Moon or Kyron Johnson. Is probably a two-headed race there. Johnson is much smaller from what I understand. And so
I think like 6'230", I think.
Yeah, we just talked about how it doesn't really matter for Herbig as much, but at least Herbig is like 6'2", 240 pounds. Like Kyron Johnson, he truly is like a middle linebacker, off-ball linebacker type size. Whereas Jeremiah Moon's got the longer arms, bigger frame overall. He has the better frame for the position. It's a tight race, I would say, between these two guys right now. I ended up going with Moon in my 53-man roster prediction just because I think he fits that role better overall. But what do you make of the guys at the bottom of the depth chart here?
Again, not a lot to talk about, and that's been a theme with this team for the most part. Last year they did have Golden and Herbig, which was really nice to have two guys who started a lot of games and had a lot of production, and then a guy that was a young guy who you expect to get a lot of good stuff from in the future, and that's what he proved to be. But Moon and Johnson are not exactly, guys who you expect a ton from if they have to play a lot. But I do agree with you that Moon is probably who I would go with because of the frame, right? Where Johnson, he might have a little bit more pass rush to him, I think. Moon just gives you more of a edge body type that you can throw out there against the run especially, and you shouldn't get destroyed as much as a guy like Johnson probably would. So it is going to come down to who has the better camp and probably the better preseason, but my guy that I would assume is the fourth edge is Moon right now.
Yeah, Shayne, and you know how I feel about the edge position. It's too valuable a position in my mind to only keep 4 players. This is probably the year that I would make an exception, though, because you just don't have the talent outside of your top 3. It's just like, I don't even know if we don't know for sure if Moon is a player worth rostering at this point. Maybe they'll have to just look at the waiver wire when cuts come here and do something else there. We'll see. We'll track Moon and Johnson as the preseason goes on, or as training camp goes on, and during the preseason games. But it looks like, they're certainly not breaking that trend of having 4 edge guys this year. It's going to be 4. It's what they always do at the position. As much as we would like them to ease the burden off of Watt and Highsmith, we can assume that that's not going to happen again. They're heavy dose for those guys with some Herbig mixed in, and probably that 4th guy, whoever that ends up being, is only going to see the field sparingly, and maybe even only if there's an injury that occurs. Let's talk about the off-ball linebacker position, and we addressed most of this already, so we'll kind of breeze through this one, Shayne. We know those top guys there. Both you and I have talked about this before. Because of Queen's status and how much they're paying him how much they paid him just this past offseason in free agency, he's going to get the most snaps at the position, assuming that he's healthy. Outside of that, Atlanta Roberts will be there next to him because of it. First of all, he's healthier than Cole Holcomb is, and we don't know if Cole Holcomb's going to be here or not based on everything that we've talked about. And then because Peyton Wilson is a rookie, and so I think Wilson gets mixed in there. I think he ends up being that situational guy, the guy that kind of comes in sub-package linebacker, and I'm excited to see what he brings to the table. Wilson has been really solid in camp so far. The speed flashes for sure. And there's been a few clips of him out there. You can just search his name on Twitter if you want to see just how the speed and agility pops out on tape. You can see that, but also going by people's practice reports from training camp and what they've said as well, that it's very, very noticeable, his athletic traits and play recognition out on the field. So I'm excited to see what he has this year.
Yeah, and Wilson also has the distinction of the guy to be out at practice earlier than everybody else, pretty much.
Yeah, he does. True.
He kind of has a routine, I guess, and stuff like that, so he goes out early. But that linebacker group, again, I think it has the potential to be the best one we've had in a while. It's just going to be, does Queen regress too far from the version of him that played next to Roquan Smith? Is Atlanta Roberts going to be able to hold up again, and maybe more snaps than maybe he should have to get realistically? And then Peyton Wilson, again, how quickly do they trust him to be on the field for more than the occasional third down snap, or maybe you bring him as a blitzer or whatever? That's going to be the biggest question outside of Holcomb's injury status, obviously.
Yeah, I think so as well. Matakavich there, special teams guy. I would assume that he makes the team, but again, it's a veteran minimum contract. Anything can happen with those guys at the bottom of the roster. It just definitely looks like they would preference him over Robinson at this point. And I think that then that's where the cutoff is. Like the guys after that, I don't think they're worth spending a lot of time talking about in our discussion
until they prove otherwise.
And somebody really flashes at camp or during a preseason game, we'll put them on the map. But as of now, it's pretty cut and dry overall at that position. And Shayne, I can't help but liken the combination of Queen and Landon Roberts to maybe a little bit, not this version, but a B version of like what the Steelers had in Shazier and Vince Williams. You got the downhill thumper, and you've got the guy that can blitz, that can run, sideline to sideline guy. I don't expect Queen to be Shazier, so don't take that out of context.
But
Shazier
the same idea,
special thing.
The same
but
idea,
in terms of their roles for the team, you've got that true Mac linebacker, that Buck linebacker, and then you've got more depth coming off the bench. Now you've got a Peyton Wilson, who we're hoping can be a really solid linebacker in this league. So definitely a lot to look forward to there for sure. Let's go to the cornerback position here, Shayne. And one player that I have to talk about is Beanie Bishop, undrafted free agent, rookie, played 6 years of college ball. Finally played his last year at West Virginia before going undrafted. Steelers picked him up. Fans were excited about that signing, largely because they kind of knew Bishop a little bit from being the local prospect there. But also, I think the excitement was justified because look what he's done so far. You look back to OTAs where he kind of eventually kicked Josiah Scott out of his job. Scott ended up getting cut just a few days ago by the Steelers. And it's Bishop who has been running as the first team slot cornerback for the Steelers. Like that doesn't happen very often when it's hard enough for a rookie, like a mid-round rookie to jump into that type of role. But for an undrafted free agent to do that right from the gate is mostly unheard of. Like this doesn't happen often at all. And so it is impressive regardless of the lack of competition that he's going against. We talked about how Tomlin typically prioritizes that veteran leadership and seniority there. He did not do that in this case with Bishop. And so it is exciting to see Bishop start to training camp and what he's done so far. He's had some really nice coverage plays down the field. So what do you make of his start so far?
I think that ideally, you talked about earlier, it's really hard to find Jaylen Warren and Mike Hilton. Well, the hope is you found one, right? Like that's I think that's the hope right now. If he's getting starting reps, which again, he doesn't have a ton of competition, unfortunately, because we don't have much in the way of that right now, at least especially at the slot corner position in particular. But again, like a guy getting this many reps and having like legitimate starting opportunity as an undrafted player, just don't see it a lot. So you have to give him his props, no matter how good or bad he ends up playing this year. If he does get that job, it takes a lot to do that as an undrafted player. So you have to give it up to him.
Yeah, for sure. And let's talk about Dante Jackson too, because by a lot of accounts, this is like the big winner of the preseason so far. The Deontay Johnson trade isn't looking so bad right now, although I'd say we certainly could use the help at wide receiver. But Dante Jackson's making it a little bit more stomachable because of his performance early in preseason. He had an interception during some team drills there, and he has blanketed George Pickens a couple times down the field. And so off to a strong start for him too.
Yeah, he's a guy that I have admittedly been very kind of hard on since he was brought in, partially because I didn't like the trade idea in general. But also because he had been showing signs of regression in the last couple of years. He had a couple major injuries. You know, his game has really been predicated on his speed and explosiveness, and that's going to eventually start to wear down, especially with knee injuries and such. But he's been great so far in camp. So obviously that has to extend into the season. But I at least hope that he's going to show more of the version of him that was a legit corner too for a couple of years there with the Panthers, at least that level of play. If we can get that next to Joey, I think we'll be just fine, at least against a lot of receiving groups.
Yeah, and Porter has been good, obviously, as well. Joey Porter is going to be Joey Porter, and he's had some good matchups with George Pickens at camp. I feel very confident that he's going to be a really good man-to-man cover corner for the Steelers this year. Obviously needs to limit the grabbiness. That's something that he's got to work on. Even in camp, I think he was called for a pass interference during training camp as well. So the one guy, Shayne, that I do want to talk about, though, before we move on from this group is Corey Trice Jr.
Yes,
I'm disappointed to see that Trice is not working with the second team at all. Like, and I'm a little bit surprised by it. I know that his entire rookie season was lost because of the ACL injury, but I keep going back to my draft evaluation of this kid at Purdue, and it was good. Like, he's a 6'3" corner, 200 pounds. Very athletic. I think he tested as like a 96 percentile athlete. The tape is really strong, like good tackler, good coverage guy all around. I thought he would get a bigger shake than what he's getting right now. And I don't know, maybe that can still turn around and change here. But like the Steelers, they seem to be favoring like Anthony Averett over him, Thomas Graham. I'm like, really? Are these guys more deserving of getting these reps than a young guy with all the tools you could ask for in Corey Trice? Like, it makes me wonder, what is he not showing either behind the scenes or on the field in these drills? Is he not fully up to speed yet from that ACL tear that he suffered? It's been roughly a full year removed from that. So I would think that he would be good at this time. I'm definitely disappointed to see where he's falling in the pecking order so far. I know Kalen Barnes is running over him as that second team corner with Darius Rush there. And Barnes is worth noting because this is a guy that former 7th round pick kind of bounced around a little bit. He had 4.23 speed.
Yeah, 4.2 guy. Legit
official 4.23 speed. So he was a fraction of a fraction away from cracking that all-time speed score at the combine. So I'm interested to see if he can offer anything as well. But Trice is that one guy. It's like, you fit the body type the Steelers are looking for, this bump and run man cover corner. I really thought it would be him and Rush fighting for that, to be that first guy off the bench, and possibly even Shayne, depending on how well either of them did, maybe being a guy that you can in 2025 slot next to Joey Porter there. It doesn't look that way for Trice right now.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because I do think he is the most physically talented guy that's not going to probably be a starter for them right now. You could argue Rush too, because they're similar in terms of the size and makeup and everything. But I think also you have to remember, like, Trice, as good as I thought he was at Purdue and we thought he was a 7th round pick. There's a lot of injury concerns. I think that they need to trust him to be able to be healthy. I think they want to ramp him back up to full speed. And obviously where you start in lines in camp is not going to affect whether you're ramping up or not. So like that does mean less, but I do think that if he is able to practice fully for a while, I do think he's going to slowly climb up the depth chart to the point where he's at least in contention to be the first guy off the bench if Porter or Jackson need a break. So I'm not too worried about it yet, but I do agree with you that that is a little bit disheartening because I do think, again, he's the most talented guy that isn't playing right now full time.
Yeah, and I think that if all things are fair and they're doing no disservice in terms of their evaluation, I think that the talent will prove out eventually. It's just right now he's not sitting in a good way with the team. He's not earning a ton of reps. He's running with the third team defense. And so I'd like to see that increase just because I do think that there is some potential there. Again, I'm not going to go overboard here. You're talking about a 7th round draft choice who a lot of cases 7th rounders don't even make the team. So I don't expect him to be the future of the Steelers at cornerback, but he is a guy that I was excited to see at this camp because that my pre-draft evaluation of him was so good. I had a 2-3 grade on this guy. If not for the multiple knee injuries, and now you add another to the list, it's like, what can you possibly do? And it's hard for the team to trust a guy that can't stay on the field either. So just an interesting player to keep tabs on as training camp marches on here. All right, Shayne, let's talk about the safety position, then the specialist, and we'll finish up today's show. So anything notable from the safety position? I don't have a lot to note from here. I know that Elliott's getting some work. He's going down in the box, like things that aren't very surprising at all. I'm interested to see like how that dynamic's going to work. Is Elliott going to be a part of Deshaun Elliott going to be part of a rotation with DeMonte Casey, or is that primarily going to be his job as the strong safety? And then Casey will come in when they do these sub packages and 3 safety sets. What is your feel for anything at the safety position? Any thoughts there?
I do think that KZ is going to be a true third safety. I don't think he's going to come in for Elliott a lot in terms of when there are just 2 safeties on the field, mostly because I think the Steelers want to get back to the Edmonds-Fitzpatrick style of safeties where one guy is a true like strong safety type who's going to be handling a lot of the stuff closer to the line of scrimmage, and Fitzpatrick is the guy that's taking away stuff over the middle of the field and deep, taking away passing opportunities down the field. That's what I do think they're trying to get back to. And KZ doesn't really do either of those things at a high level. So you want to have him be just that third defensive back in certain situations where you don't want to bring like a 4th corner, you want to bring a third safety. That's where I think he's mostly going to make his mark this year. So, and then outside of those guys, like Watts making the transition to safety from corner at Texas is one I want to see. I haven't heard a lot about him, so I might have to look up more about what he's doing. But really, interesting player. So I'm curious what he looks like. But outside of that, not a whole lot of stuff from the safety room that I've seen.
Yeah, and you said it. There is something to be said for continuity and chemistry at the safety position, as we know with Troy Polamalu, Ryan Clark. Like, you want that other guy opposite you that if Fitzpatrick is the back end playmaker, like you can account for that guy. And so I would expect the same. I think that Elliott's going to be there. When it comes to Ryan Watts, another interesting player because he's that big, athletic, not the fastest player, but really good testing athlete in terms of explosiveness. Has like historically long on like 34.5-inch arms. They're longer than Porter's somehow, or comparably so. So I don't know how exactly he's looked so far. I haven't heard a ton on him.
Me either.
But I almost just looking at the roster outlook, Shayne, I wonder if his path got harder moving to the safety position, because you have Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, DeMonte KZ. Those are your top three. Miles Killebrew is just coming off a Pro Bowl season as a special teamer. So unless you keep a fifth safety in Ryan Watts, his path to the roster looks really hard. Like maybe you'd be better off making it there as a corner.
Yeah, I just think, again, like his long speed, I don't know if it plays at corner personally. All the other athletic measurements I think are good, but I think that he is going to be a guy that, like, if he can't get a good press on, he might get run by. Like, that's kind of the problem with him. I think as a safety, though, he has the size and the explosiveness to make plays on the ball from the back end. And I will say with the Killebrew situation, like, he is going to obviously make this team because of what he does, but he's really not the fourth safety, or at least he shouldn't be. I would argue if you're playing him on defense, he's more of a linebacker than a safety, even more than just a box safety. I legitimately think he's just probably a better linebacker type player at this point than a safety. So you could argue that that spot is kind of its own thing, and then the real fourth safety is whoever else makes it at safety. But that depends on how they want to construct the roster, obviously. So,
yeah, I think that's fair to say. Let's talk about the specialists real quick, and then we'll sign off because this is a long show for us.
Well, hey, we've been gone for a while. Yeah, we've been gone for a while. We got to come back and figure stuff out.
Yes. Right. We had to make up for that lack of show last week. Let's talk about the specialists here. Chris Boswell, I heard, missed a couple field goals in practice, 46-yarder, 42-yarder, I think, based on I think it was Alex Kazora's charting on those ones. I'm not worried about it. Like, this guy, he's been so money. Now, he did have the really down year, and we know that kickers are capable of having
kickers are weird sometimes.
So it's a lot of it is a mental game. So let's hope that doesn't happen with Boswell again. And obviously he's been excellent. So there is no competition here at any of these three spots, Shayne. And so we won't spend a lot of time talking about this. Cameron Johnson has looked solid. So far, I think in terms of, I can't remember, hang time was good. From Kazora, and distance was average. That's okay. And Christian Kuntz is going to be the long snapper. Like, those are your three guys. Like, I would be floored if anybody else even gets into the conversation there.
I did hear, I think it was Logan Lee was doing a little bit of long snapping just to show that he could do it, apparently. Right. Which I mean, obviously it's nice in case something were to happen to Christian Kuntz, but that is kind of funny that he can. I mean, that's a big long snapper if it's Logan Lee out there. But no, I think that in general, the specialist roles you expect to be taken care of now that they moved off of Presley Harvin. So I expect that to be the same. And again, if something changes, it's only because of injury or, hopefully not terrible performance, but I don't expect that from any of those guys.
Yeah, and if you're a guy like Lee, why not? Like, show your value to this team. Make the team in any way that you can, because if you know that you're buried on the depth chart right now, show them that I can wear multiple hats here. So I think that's a good thing that's at least they're trying him out and see what he's got there. All right, that's going to do it for us on today's show. Thank you all for chiming in. Most of you for chiming in, I should say, on today's show. We will be back this time next week at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter. Follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And check out Josh George's show on Mondays live at 1:30. So he goes live Monday. We go live on Wednesdays. And thanks again, everybody, for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.